Hi, everybody. Welcome to Crushing Doubts Q&A. I got to get my Instagram going, and then we will get the questions and answers going on mind-body symptoms. Give me 1 second. As always, I wish there just wasn't this lag. But here we are. We're on Instagram, and we're on YouTube. Hopefully, we're on Facebook as well. We should be. I'm Dr. Dan Ratner. I'm here, as always, to talk about mind-body symptoms. And this is a Q&A. It is designed for you to ask any questions you have about what mind-body symptoms are, why you can get better, how to think about things, etc. And I have a lot of expertise in this area for multiple reasons, but one of them is that I have been a mind-body sufferer throughout my life in various ways, and included in that was 8 years of chronic everyday back pain. 8 years, nonstop. There was like never a period that was stopped except for like a 2-minute period at one point, mysteriously, about 6 years in, maybe 7 years in. Very strange. And I can understand it now. But the whole idea behind this Q&A is that what I found is to get better, I really needed to understand what was going on. And to understand what's going on, you need to ask your questions, and you need to get them asked and answered to your satisfaction. So that's what I'm here to do. Let's first talk about what mind-body symptoms are. They are any symptom that doctors can't attach to a very specific and clear medical or structural issue. Now, they often, lots of doctors, as great as they are, will tell you that there's a particular structural issue or a particular medical issue. I can help you know which ones of those things have been debunked and you don't need to worry about. And by the way, these are in their own medical journals. The New England Journal of Medicine, the Journal of the American Medical Association, the best journals in the nation and the world. They all back me up on these things. And that's a really interesting point that a lot of doctors just don't get because it's not in their training yet. So we're working on changing this whole picture to understand that if you are feeling certain things and if you're thinking certain things, that's your brain doing those things. And it is going to become realized in your body in all sorts of ways. If you think about it from an everyday perspective, we have this with blushing. We get embarrassed, our blood flow changes. There you go. Even a smile is a mind-body thing. So is a frown. Your entire face is a mind-body experience. I actually was just working on the audio recording of the book, and I can tell you there's a lot of mind-body experience in speaking. I got to get myself into the right headspace just to be able to get my mouth to work right. So mind-body experience is very common. We all have it all the time. But when it gets really out of control, it can lead to sudden acute symptoms that can be scary and hard. And we've got to figure out how to control them. And I can do that. And if the symptoms are really getting entrenched and just staying there, that can be incredibly frustrating and worrisome. And I can break those up too. So when I answer these questions, the way that I'm going to answer these questions is through the system that I've developed. Towards the end of my suffering, when I discovered the works of Dr. John Sarno, I came to understand what this was all about and how to think about it. And he helped tremendously, but I still had lots of questions. And I asked them, I explored things. I developed a system that was first for myself, but then became something that I realized was very useful for other people. This is called the columns system. And it basically divides mind-body experience into 3 different categories of how to understand mind-body thinking. So you're going to hear me talk about these 3 columns. They are the emotions, doubt, and power columns. I'm going to make it very simple at the beginning, but as you listen, try to think about what I'm saying and how these make sense. The emotions column is the part of the organization that talks about your feeling states. When you have an unconscious emotion, sometimes you can even be partially consciously aware of it, but if it's in your unconscious, these symptoms can get enacted, especially with onsets and upticks in symptoms. With the doubt column, these are the kinds of symptoms that didn't just come on like the emotions column ones. These are the ones that won't budge. They seem to be always the same. And why is that? That is because if the thinking stays the same, then your physiology stays the same. That's part of this Q&A, is to change your thinking, because that can really break up the process and change things. And if you see things starting to change and symptoms that weren't changing before, that lets you know there's a lot of hope. Lastly, there is the power column. This isn't for onsets and upticks. It's not for symptoms that won't budge. What it is for symptom plateaus, where you've gotten a lot better, but you just can't break through fully. And the power column, where the emotions column is really about feeling and the doubt column is about thinking, the power column is about your relationship with yourself, getting to a place where you can feel good in your relationship with you. So every question I answer is going to be based on these three columns. And I encourage you all, try not to think about just your one question to me or a couple questions to me. Try to think about, what does it all mean? How does it all fit together? That's part of my goal. Let me say hi to a couple people. I want to especially say hi to people I haven't seen before. For everybody who's coming back, thank you so much for joining me again. But G. Nazarov, thank you for joining us here. I haven't seen you here yet. Gomez Vibes, I know we've traded some messages occasionally, I believe. Welcome here. Windy City Baller, good to see you. Let's see, who else is new here? Someone famous girlfriend, thank you for joining us here. Rick T. Garrett, good to see you. Melvin Makepeace. Big Man Mike, I think I saw you 1 week recently, but welcome back. And if you're a regular here, thank you so much, especially to you guys for being here. You guys make this show what it needs to be, and help bring attention to it, because really my goal here is to answer people's questions. It's to get them answers that make a big difference to them in their healing process. And it also is to spread the word about this. Ultimately, we've got to change all of society, because otherwise we keep getting bad messages, and we don't want that. Okay, Sarah Moditz, thank you for the super sticker. Very nice of you to chip in. Every bit of support does help. I run an organization that is meant to help people, and it's often running a bit at a deficit because there's just so many people to help. And so that, every little bit helps, and I appreciate it. Sarah did say, hi, Dan and Crushing Doubt family. It's good to see you here. And this might, sometimes if people are on a different name, do let me know. But Sarah, thanks for being here with us. All right. We're going to get to some questions here. So Ani Crowfoot, good to see you. Ani is a mind-body coach that I've trained in my system, and I do train people in my system. So if you're interested in learning, please do let me know. You can always email me, dan@crushingdoubt.com. Okay. Ani said, you talk about how the mind-body defense is used for people or more psychologically advanced, and for goodists. Let me just pause and say what that is. So goodists is the term that Dr. Sarno used for people who tend to take care of other people and think about other people a lot and have a lot of pressure inside themselves to do good. Goodists are some of the best people you'll ever meet, but one of my goals is to help people still be goodists without compromising their health and their symptom life. Okay, now Ani said, I observe a few people. There are some people in my life who are clearly suffering from mind-body symptoms who do not strike me as goodists, nor do they seem particularly psychologically advanced. Rather, I see them as living by a strong victim narrative. Can you talk about this discrepancy? A beautiful question, Ani. So here's what I'll say to that. But before I answer any question, let me say this. Every answer is just the first answer. These are discussions. We need to have lots and lots of discussions about this. So this is just my first answer. Ani, do follow up. Everybody else chime in with follow up as needed. And we'll go from there. So there are many reasons that people have mind-body symptoms. And Ani's highlighting that. Goodists sometimes have symptoms because they're sacrificing themselves so much that their body starts to object. Sometimes there's very psychologically advanced people who have symptoms because they've moved past some of the other defenses and they don't have many defenses in place that can help them, and the mind-body defense can do that. It's a more advanced psychological defense. But, I often like to explain these discrepancies, so I really appreciate you bringing this to our attention, Ani. The way I can describe this discrepancy is that there's multiple reasons that mind-body symptoms happen, and here's another one. There's another group of people that get symptoms that have nothing to do with goodism or psychological advancement. It's people who are really, really bodily afraid. If you have a lot of fear in relation to your body, it doesn't matter whether you're a goodist, it doesn't matter whether you're psychologically advanced, you are more prone to going there. You're more prone to going to that place, whether it's because you've had injuries before or illnesses, or there's a history in your family of illnesses or injuries. That's one group. Here's another group that tends towards mind-body experience. People who have experienced lots of trauma, especially early in their lives. Why is that? Because a lot of times the body is speaking for us in ways that we can't even we can't even recognize what we're trying to say or what we feel. So that's a whole other group. Ani, those are just two groups so far that I'm mentioning that are totally different than people who are psychologically advanced or goodists. Another one is actually one you mentioned. People who are feeling a strong sense of victim narrative. It feeds it, and listen, I want to be clear about one thing. I don't actually believe in secondary gain. That is the concept that people have symptoms because they're trying to get attention. That's not very typical. In fact, I don't think it really happens much at all. But I think that strong victim narrative, even if they really would rather get better, they're people who don't believe they can get better. So pessimism and a dark view of what can happen. What is that? That's very high levels of doubt. Those people are more prone to this as well. Each of the columns can describe different aspects of this. Like the emotions column would probably describe kind of the goodest situation where they're putting away a lot of their feelings and the body's screaming about it. The doubt column can explain people who are having huge bodily fear or don't have a good sense of optimism that they can get better. That's the doubt column all the way. The power column is about your relationship with yourself and whether it's good. So people who have a lot of trauma, who maybe don't think of themselves so highly, they might not even think they deserve to get better. So that's a very long answer, but hopefully a useful one, Ani, that describes the first step in thinking about that seeming discrepancy. And the basic gist is this: it happens for multiple reasons. My job is to figure out which reason's happening when, and which symptom is happening when, and which part of which column is active when. I got to think about all that stuff. So, Ani, thank you for the question. I hope it's helpful for you and for everybody else who heard that answer. All right, we have a couple questions coming in from Instagram. Gomez Vibe says, "How do I go about getting out of the cycle?" This is a mind-body cycle that I think he's talking about. For example, every day I wake up and I grab my neck and crack it. Then I walk into the bathroom and look at the mirror and say, another day of this. It's just a vicious cycle of negativity. But who can think positive while feeling like crap for 5 years straight? Okay, first let me validate something. The answer to your second question is no one. No one feels suddenly positive after feeling like crap for 5 years straight. What you need to feel better is a reason to have optimism. And the good news, as I see it, is I can provide that. The columns can provide that. And the columns are really just my observations on what is. So they're just information, but they provide a reason you can get better. So we'll get to that in a second, but let's first talk about how to break this cycle. When you wake up, the first thing you do is grab your neck and crack it. I consider that, I'm not saying you're doing anything bad, but I want to recommend something. That's something that I consider testing. It's like does it still hurt? Do I need to adjust something? I understand why you're doing it, but it adds to the sense of physicality. You don't want to think physical first. The first thing you want to do is think emotionally. So when you wake up, I want you thinking about your emotional experience. Now I'm going to get even more specific. In my system, there's a flow to the system. It's bring down doubt, then learn about emotions, and then flow into power. When you're in a cycle like this, that is a doubt part of the cycle. That's the first thing you got to deal with is the doubt. So I understand why you wouldn't just naturally be positive. But what I want you to think about is that your negativity isn't just based on feeling like crap for 5 years straight, though that's a big part of it. And I'm sorry it's been happening, but we're going to break this. We're going to get you better fast. The other reason that you have that negativity is because you have a lot of doubt. And what typically happens is doubt sneaks by without even you catching wind of it. You just think it's true. So I have a rule of thumb in the doubt column, or I guess these are the tasks of the doubt column is a better way of saying it. It's observe, articulate, and counter. Now, let me say what each of those things mean. To observe doubt is to call it into question. It's to not let it sneak by as a fact, because it's not a fact. We need to call it into question. Then next is to articulate it. Put it into words, just what it sounds like. What are you thinking? So instead of thinking I've been here for 5 straight years and I feel like crap, which understandable that you would feel horrible about that. But let's get it more specific. Why do you think you're there? As an example, you might think nobody has the answer, but that's wrong. Or you might think I have the answer, but I can't apply it. Okay, then let's work on that. But you've got to identify what is the doubt. And so to break this cycle, observe, then articulate. Counter is last, and I wouldn't rush to that. But ultimately, you're going to put new thinking in place that is based on information, science, logic, personal observation, my expertise, whatever it takes to get you to feel confident that, oh, you know what, I actually can think differently. That's what's going to change it. So we're working in the doubt column, which of course is about thinking. And so when you say, how do I go about getting out of the cycle? Don't think physically. Think about doubt. What is the doubt? Are you not observing some doubts? Are they sneaking by and representing themselves as facts? Like, oh, if I've been like this for 5 years, I'm not going to get better. That's not a fact. That's a doubt. Call it into question, put it into words, articulate it, and then we can work on countering it. That's how we're going to start to break the cycle. Without realizing it, you get into the same thought cycle right away. And that's what you're describing and waking up. I don't blame you for it. I totally understand. But that's how to get through it. Now, that's how to start breaking through it. As always, that's my first answer to the question. Let's keep the conversation coming. Okay, Rudemaster27. Good to see you, Rudy. He said, hello there, Pain Detective. That's his nickname for me. Sorry, I've missed a lot of your videos. I was running errands. He said, sorry, that was a mistake, some typos. But yes, I do know what you mean. Welcome back. Everybody's always welcome here. You can dip in and out, whatever you need, as long as you're getting your questions answered. All right. Gomez then said, it's interesting and helps prove it's a mind-body syndrome when many of the symptoms feel better after taking SSRIs. So yes, that is essentially a brain intervention that changes symptoms. Now, I do want to say on the other side of the coin, that doesn't mean everybody needs to take SSRIs to get better. What it does mean is things need to change in the brain. Whether it's through SSRIs or not doesn't matter, but we need to change the brain. We need to change what we're thinking. And all we have to do that is learn a new way of thinking about things. Gomez did have the question, should we post questions here or on YouTube? It doesn't matter. I see them in both places, whatever you prefer. All right. Let's see. Russell Crane's Music, good to see you here. And by the way, if I miss any questions, please do let me know. I do see Annie Crowfoot said, yes, very helpful. Thank you. My pleasure. Okay, so back to you, Russell. Hey, Dan and CD fam. I'm currently dealing with an intense flare-up of emotion column symptoms, fatigue, trouble sleeping, anxiety. How do I free myself of the symptoms? I know the source. All right. First of all, I'm sorry you're dealing with a flare-up. Flare-ups suck. Absolutely. But there's always an answer. I have an overarching rule of thumb, which is you make sense and your symptoms make sense. And you've already bought into a lot of the system. You use it all the time. You're using it even right now. And here's what I'd say. I think you have found the emotions column reason for the flare-up based on what you're telling me. We could explore it and find that maybe you're not seeing it quite as clearly, but I trust you. You know. So you've probably already got the emotions column onset or uptick reason. Now where I want you to go, and this is one of the reasons having 3 columns is useful, is to recognize, is doubt weaseling its way in here? Is it getting you to think, oh, this isn't working, so I'm not going to get somewhere? Because if so, we need to articulate what that doubt is, observe it, of course, call it into question and articulate it, and then we need to counter it. But the main thing, Russell, and this will not surprise you, but the main thing that we need for you is power column work. The emotions and power column are both emotional columns. In other words, they deal with feelings, whereas the doubt column is primarily about thinking. When it comes to fear, that's the emotional form of doubt, and there does need to be some intervention there around the emotionality of it, but we do that through thinking. In the emotions and power column, we use understanding of emotions. The emotions column is for emotional awareness. And Russell, what you're saying is I've already got the awareness, but it's not bringing down that symptom onset. So since we know it's emotional in nature, and since we know that the awareness is not bringing the symptom down, one of two things is happening. Either you've got the wrong awareness, which I don't think is the case based on what you're saying. You sound very confident in the source. That's good. What it probably is needing to make an emotional adjustment. And that happens in the power column. That's where we look at how we are interacting with ourselves and make some new decisions. And so, Russell, I think you're about to have a power column breakthrough, and that's how we can deal with this flare. How do you free yourself of the symptoms? I think we need to recognize what's the power issue here. But if doubt has crept in, especially if it got to any kind of fear standpoint, we've got to squash that. I'm not hearing that's the case, so I would go straight to the power column. Let's follow up as needed, but I want to say one thing about following up here. And that is that following up here is welcome. Ask as many questions as you want, but since we have limited time here, and since I can't have direct interaction with you here, sometimes you're not always going to get all of your questions answered as much as you'd want. And so I want to put in a plug for my groups, because my groups are an incredibly cost-effective way to be able to see me very regularly. They're $100 a month. You get 3 meetings a week. They're 2 hours each. That's 24 hours a month for $100, where you get to sit down with me and some other people and talk about these things. And not only that, it's like this, but even better, because there can be all kinds of back and forth right at the start. I ask the questions I need asked to get you the most pinpointed answer. And you might ask me questions about what I'm saying, or tell me things about what you need that completely pinpoint where we need to go. So it's a lot like this. And the whole thing is really the same, in that the goal is to get your questions answered, make you clear on what's happening, give recommendations about what to do. But we just get much further. We have more time. Not only that, but you also get to hear from each other. I do something at the beginning of the groups, which is share your wins. And you get to hear about steps forward. You get to hear about what's really working, about symptoms coming down, about mindsets changing. There's all kinds of good stuff that happens in the groups. That's available on my website, www.crushingdoubt.com. I do recommend, for best use, to either do my seminars, which are also available on there. There are 8 sessions that walk you through the whole mind-body experience and the column system and just set you up for success there, or reading my book. One or the other gives you a sense of the system. All right, so let's do follow-up, Russell, as needed. Okay, a couple more questions coming in from Instagram. Sarah Rudo, good to see you. It's been a while. Knox Flamma said, how late am I? You are not super late. I think you got here about maybe 15 minutes in. You can always watch the replay, but we're still here for another, I can go until 5:45 my time tonight. I do have something that makes me have to stop a little bit earlier. Okay, Rudemaster says, how's the audiobook coming along? I am hitting my stride on it. I'm getting it done. It is going to take a little bit of time because, reading a book does take some time, especially because I got to get the cadence right exactly as I want it to be, and in ways that will help you with your doubts. There's also a lot of big words in that book. And so, speaking of mind-body experiences, I can have my mouth maybe not form the words right if I'm not in the right mindset. So there's a lot of that. And then I'm going to have to go back and edit it with my my producer, Greg. And even so, I'm hoping it'll be done in about maybe 2 to 3 months is my hope. I'll try to make it go faster, but I finished the introduction in chapter 1. I'm almost done with chapter 2. So it is really starting to roll along. Okay, Windy City Baller says, learn to love yourself. That's the true power. And then said, people change people. And that both are true. This is a power column message, though, if you think about it. Learn to love yourself. That's the true power. And that's what he's saying here, I think. And so it really is right. When you are in a good place with yourself, you will be surprised at how much it alleviates in terms of the stress of interacting with other people. Get to a good place with you. And that can be done. And it can be done by understanding what's going on with yourself, with your symptoms. The symptoms are all information. All right. Melvin Makepeace has a question. Sorry if others already know the answer to this. Never apologize for that. We got to repeat all of this stuff. But what do you mean by psychologically advanced people? Okay, Melvin, I know it's a little far back in the discussion, so sorry just to get to it now. But what I mean by what I think Ani meant by this, and I mean by following up on it, is people who have spent a lot of time in therapy, which, by the way, that doesn't always mean that people are psychologically advanced. What I mean by it, at least, I'll speak for myself, is people who have moved past certain ways of operating that were not very functional. And so it's mostly about psychological defenses. A person who uses, there's a psychological defense called projection, for example. That's where we say, I'm not doing that, you're doing that. And it's not the kindest psychological defense. It's kind of primitive. It's relying on the other person having to deal with it and not dealing with it ourselves. So usually what we mean by psychologically advanced is they've taken a lot of look at certain defenses, they've gotten rid of certain defenses, and they're often choosing defenses that are more adaptive. That's a way of describing psychologically advanced. I recognize, though, and I say this with full respect for anybody, there's all kinds of ways to be advanced. So don't think of it as like some people are psychologically advanced and some are not. You could even look at it as some people are psychologically advanced in certain areas and not. Some people are psychologically advanced some of the time and not. It's highly varied. But what we mean by that is very adaptive functioning. And a lot of times people with mind-body symptoms are functioning very adaptively in every other aspect of their lives. And so there's less room for them to not need to take a hit somewhere. And where do they take the hit? Usually in the body. Okay, Melvin, let me know if that made sense. Let me know if you have further questions about that. Cheryl Marie Jacobson, thank you for joining us here as well. It's been a while since I've seen you. Good to see everybody here, though. Okay. Beatrice. If I think that every time I face a new challenging situation now, since I have these severe TMS symptoms, TMS is tension myositis syndrome, which is what Dr. Sarno called mind-body issues. Let me back up. I think that every time I face a new challenging situation now, since I have these severe TMS symptoms, makes the doubt become so high, I think. And so that's why the symptoms, hold on, I lost the thread of this. I think that doubt, fear, and symptoms increase when I face new challenging situations I cannot avoid. Life stress. Seems like challenges did not produce symptoms in the past, only anxiety. Why do you think this occurs? Is it because anxiety was not a sufficient defense mechanism? And if so, that sucks because the anxiety somehow I could deal with. So this question has a lot of different aspects to the answer, and I'll give that a try. And Beatrice, let's do follow-up as needed. So one of the reasons this can happen, why a mind-body symptom now, is, first of all, sometimes people do actually develop past certain defense mechanisms, and anxiety could be one of them. I understand you wish you wish you could go back to it because you could deal with that. But the reality is, at a certain point, we all are kind of clamoring inside ourselves to process whatever our internal experience is that isn't going well. And typically speaking, people are carrying a lot of unresolved trauma in them, and they've been managing it as well as they could, and they run out of gas, or they hit a wall, or as I like to say, even walls fall down. It's a Tom Petty quote, but it describes how nobody can last forever. And so eventually you got to deal with things. Typically speaking, Beatrice, and this certainly happened for you, you hit a wall also for a particular reason, a certain thing going on in your life. When you have really severe mind-body symptoms, sometimes this is what's called a neuroplastic feedback loop, which most mind-body sufferers don't have, but a significant proportion do. And it's all the same thing. It all gets treated the same way, but the severity of it needs to be understood. Why is it that severe? Why does it take longer to recover in that way? You said, why do you think this occurs? I think usually it occurs because we've been carrying traumatic experiences and feelings with us, and then something hits us so damn hard that we just can't ignore it anymore. it's I don't like to think of it as a breakdown because that makes it sound like we're vulnerable or we couldn't handle something. And I don't think that's the case. What it really is to me is something that I would speak to in the power column, which is there is a part of you that doesn't want to have to live that way forever. So even if you were managing it decently enough, there's a part of you that just was like, I'm sick of this. And here's the thing: the older we get, the less tolerant we can be of that. Because at some level, we know we don't want to run out of time. We want to get there to good living as fast as possible, and we want to live there for as long as we can. And so there becomes increasing pressure over time to get there, on top of the fact that there were unresolved things. So, Beatrice, there's a combination of things: the pressure to discover what it is, the wish to get aligned with the self, the running out of steam, and then also the stressors that can just explode at a certain point. And that's what happened with you. So let's see what you think. Beatrice added trauma activation. That is another reason. So trauma activation is a thing where all the things from the past, they can be pretty dormant, almost like a volcano, but then something makes them erupt because it was activating. All right. Big man. Melvin Makepeace says, thank you for the answer. It's my pleasure. Melvin, do follow up. If it didn't answer it well enough, let me know. Okay. Big man Mike says, hi, Dan. And thank you. This is a great help. Glad to hear it. Thank you so much. Along the same line, how can someone stop the fear and worry that the pain is a physical injury? So that's a great question. This is one of those great examples of in group, we'd get so much further because I would ask you, wait a minute, hold on. What are you saying? What physical injury are you worried about? Why do you have that? And I'd have a lot more data to understand. So I'm going to answer it as best I can, but let's do follow up as needed. It could even be follow up next week as needed, or you could come to group anytime. So the main thing is this: we've got to pinpoint why you worry that the pain is a physical injury. It could come from, well, a doctor diagnosed that. It could come from, well, I had a physical event that really was scary and it sure seemed like an injury. Or it could come from, I heard about that from other people. I mean, there are actually hundreds of reasons like that, Mike. But I would want to pinpoint, well, why? You say, how can someone stop the fear and worry? To do that, we've got to address the problem at hand. It won't work, and I think you know this. It won't work for somebody to just be like, don't worry about it. It's not. I know that it does not matter what I think. It matters what you think. And why is that? Because at the end of this Q&A, you don't leave with my brain. You leave with your brain. I leave with mine, you leave with yours, and we do what we do. So we've got to change whatever's going on in your brain. And to do that, we need to know, well, what's happening? What are you thinking? What are you feeling? Ultimately, the answer to your question is this: the right information given to you in a convincing enough manner is going to change that fear and worry. And usually that's actually not that hard of a job, because so many of these symptoms are actually mind body, and people just don't know that. And so sometimes it can happen, Mike, in ways where people are like, well, I have a herniated disc and that causes back pain. And I can be like, hold on. I can show you many research studies that show that herniated discs do not have any correlation to pain. So sometimes it's science. Sometimes it's logic, where you're like, I was having the pain, but actually when I think about it, I didn't have it 3 days ago. Well, that's pretty hard to argue it's a structural or medical or physical issue if it comes and goes. If it stays in one place, but it doesn't seem to fit with anything that you did that would make sense. I mean, when I developed 8 years of back pain, I didn't even do anything. I just bent over to tie my shoes. What kind of sense does that make? So sometimes it's that kind of logic, or the logic of evolutionary theory and why it doesn't make sense that you would have this. So I'll give you one recommendation for combating all that. Is my book is great for that. It's called Crushing Doubt, and it is meant to absolutely obliterate these doubts by showing you from every different angle why these things are mind body and you don't need to worry about it. Ultimately, it's going to be about what makes sense to you and what puts it to rest for you. But that's what we need. We need science. We need logic. We need observations. You could think of yourself as kind of like a a science experiment of your own. You're your own science experiment, and you need to look at those results with a very critical eye towards seeing maybe this really isn't at all physical. One of the things is you got to be open to it, which I already hear that you are, I think. But you get open to it and you start studying it, and the cracks and doubts arguments show all over the place. So many different answers to that, Mike, but let's go with that to start. Let's do follow up as needed. Okay, Ani Crowfoot says, I notice you use the term neuroplastic mostly when discussing the neuroplastic feedback loop related to trauma, whereas you use the phrase mind-body for other mind-body symptoms. This is entirely true, and I'll say why in a second. My question is, aren't all mind-body symptoms neuroplastic in nature? So here's my first answer. The answer to that is yes. But why do I make that distinguishment? Well, first of all, there's many, many terms that people use in the mind-body field and in this whole experience that are essentially interchangeable. It doesn't matter to me which one you use. Mind-body, neuroplastic, people use mind-body syndrome, people use TMS, which is a term that I love because I love Dr. Sarno. People use psychosomatic even. It does not matter as long as you know that the mind is causing whatever happens in the body. So what I did is I decided I'm going to choose certain terms for myself in the way that I represent things and why. Almost always I use mind body, but I did find I need to make a distinction between your typical mind body symptoms and something called a neuroplastic feedback loop. And one of the reasons I make this distinction is that I had both experiences. My back pain was a more typical mind body experience, even though it lasted for 8 years and it was horrifying. But I also had a foot issue for a number of years that was what I would call a neuroplastic feedback loop. And it just was that much more entrenched problem that has 3 parts to it. One, a very big emotional experience that led to the onset of it, much bigger than your typical emotions column event. Super high doubt and fear, usually related to the belief that there is an injury. So the doubt just gets way out of whack because of that. And then very obsessive thinking about it. So it's got like all of the worst parts of difficult mind-body experience all rolled into one. Now, I call that neuroplastic because to me, that one, it's still, everything follows the same rules, but that one involves the central nervous system. It's like your whole brain and your whole body is really, really revved up. So to me, it's helpful to think of it as more of a very brain related thing. Whereas mind body to me empowers people to think about it that you can do a lot with your emotional state, with your thinking state to change things on the spot. If we think of it all as neuroplastic, I find that feeds the belief that it's harder to break. It starts to make the issue as like, oh, you're in some kind of loop with your brain. Now, I understand I am saying that for neuroplastic feedback loop, but that is because that's actually really happening, whereas it's really not otherwise. So neuroplastic just means that the brain can change. That's all that term means. But the reason I use it not for typical mind-body symptoms is I don't like to feed the idea that the brain is in a loop with itself unless it really is. And so I just don't like to invoke that neural idea because the way people think about it. Ultimately, what it comes down to is I know what tends to lead to doubt in different people, and I don't want to lead to doubt. So I use mind body as often as possible. And when I use, just because I think it causes the least doubt and it empowers people the most for quick change. Whereas neuroplastic, I use to bring down doubt in the people who are having that kind of experience. I use it to describe that loop that is happening. So, Ani, let's do follow up on that as needed. Okay. Jamie and Webb, good to see you here as well. All right, Beatrice, we have one last question, unless there's anybody. I could probably get 2 questions, and if anybody wants to chime in, but Beatrice has something here. So, how to face life stressors in the midst of really stressful situation? Let's see. So, how to face life stressors in the midst of neuroplastic feedback loop because they do. So Oh, okay. We entered it multiple times. Let's see. So, how to go through life stressors while in the midst of a neuroplastic feedback loop, since I've basically avoided life versus facing it in spite of my symptoms. Lots of answers to this question, Beatrice. This is another good example of something that would happen in group where I could ask you more questions about it. We could get this honed. But I'm going to give you my basic answer to this, and we'll go from there. The first thing is I want you to combat the doubt because it's kind of sneaking through here around stressors. It's basically saying to you, well, this is hard enough. You're not going to be able to manage life stressors. First thing I would do is combat the doubt about that and say, no, no, no. No, you don't have to ask in group. It's fine, Beatrice. Well, you can do that also, but I'm going to give you my answer here and then we'll go from there. But every question that's asked here is a good example of what would be better in group because I can just follow up more. That's all I was saying. But in terms of my first answer here, bring down the doubt that life stressors necessarily need to hold you back from being able to make gains. The key here is the power column. Of course, you got to work on doubt. But after that, you have to recognize that you can make good adjustments for you, no matter what's happening. I've said this before, but you can be in power in a war zone. And you can be in power standing in front of a narcissist who's trying to torture you. It's the difference between looking at them and being afraid of them and what they can do and looking at them and thinking, you can't do much of anything to me. Because if I don't start torturing myself, it's not going to matter. So we have to bring down the concept that life stressors are going to stand in your way. We also have to help you feel that there are ways to measure and understand what's going to lead to progress in a neuroplastic feedback loop versus not. As I've said in group to you, you are making huge, huge progress cognitively. I know the symptoms haven't changed much, but that's typical with a neuroplastic feedback loop. There tends to be a greater lag. The symptoms take longer to come down, but it's the same cognitive work. And even more specifically, I hone it to people who have an experience like you because I know what needed to happen that was different for me. So don't worry about life stressors. They're not the things that are going to stop you. The thing that's going to stop you is if you keep freaking out inside you. And even when that happens, you know my rule of thumb about this. For a neuroplastic feedback loop, and this is probably true for mind-body issues in general, spend as much of the time as possible with your doubt as low as possible. That's the number one rule with neuroplastic feedback loops especially. Life stressors, they don't have to mean anything in terms of whether you can get better or how fast you can get better. That's not what it's about. Note them, think about them, make adjustments as you need to, but they're not the things that are going to hold you back. And that's the main way I can really help you with this question. All right. Beatrice says, thanks. So helpful always. Okay. I'm glad to hear it, Beatrice. Jody Lynn, thanks for joining us here. I'm going to answer one more question, then we'll wrap up here. Nox Flamma says, have you ever treated anyone with mind-body triggered psychogenic coughs? Absolutely. I have on multiple occasions. If so, what would you say was most effective in helping them recover? Not the main symptom, but definitely a symptom imperative. Okay. Symptom imperative is what Dr. Sarno talked about when new symptoms come on, when something gets alleviated. So there's really, the columns map out how to help here. One is to work with people on doubt, because look, if doubt is playing a big role and they're like, well, I don't know if this is mind body, we got to start there first. It's always bring down doubt first. But I think, Nox Flamma, what you're talking about more is what I would say is an emotions column intervention. Usually things like coughs and sneezes, anything that just really comes and goes very quickly, is emotional in nature. So ultimately, I would want to look at what's happening in the emotions column that leads to these symptoms. And to make it more specific for everybody, what I do in the emotions column is I help people to create what's known as a mind-body, I really call it an emotional themes menu. That's the best way to say it. What it is it's a list of the things that bother you most in life, so that when you, let's say, have a cough, you could be like, what was it? Oh, that I had a person being dismissive of me. I had a person not believing me. And you'll be able to get specifically more to what's going on there. So that's my guess. But the power column also could come into play if there's some kind of low power situation or not feeling good about yourself. But my guess here is that the emotions column, as long as doubt is low enough, is the place to look here. That's the most effective in helping recover from that. And the proof is in the pudding. If they're thinking about something and the cough goes away, the doubt comes way down. All right, Mira, thank you so much for that super sticker. Really, really helpful. I can't tell you how much it does help people chipping in like this. We have a budget that we're always working on, and it really helps to keep me going. So much appreciated. Guys, I want to thank you all for great questions, great participation. I'm hoping that these answers were helpful to everybody. I will be here again next Thursday. It's 5 p.m. Eastern, 2 p.m. Pacific, and we'll just keep right on rolling. Keep pushing to get your questions answered. That's what everybody needs. I'll keep the answers coming. Rick, thank you. He says, thank you for what you do. Jody says, great info. Thanks. I appreciate you guys so much. Knox Flama says, wow, brilliant. Many thanks. Much appreciated. You guys are making me feel good on the way out of here. Sarah Jones says, thanks as well. Really appreciate you guys. And we'll just keep this up. Keep the questions coming. You need your questions answered. Go to my website, www.crushingdoubt.com. If you want to look at any of the resources available for that, you can get my book on Amazon. If you did get the book and it really helped you, think about leaving a review. It gets its attention to other people. It endorses it. And the whole idea is we've got to get more and more people to understand this, because then you all won't have to suffer as much. People will really get these ideas and will be better supported. But thank you so much for joining me here. I'll see you guys next week, and thank you again.